where they wished each other a very safe journey, and she got the peck in the cheek, and it was really
a moment of genuine human connection.
And I just hope Dad upstairs is. Okay. Yeah,
I bet you he is.
Yeah.
I bet you he is, Donald.
Donald McGill talking to Bill about your Hayes in the morning. And on the live line, selling German war memorabilia, Katie Hannon was in for Joe.
Now, on Saturday, this Saturday coming, an Irish auction house will be selling off 2 items. A compass bearing a swastika, which is dated July 1944, a very significant date for an item bearing a swastika, and a death mask of a face which is described as that of a German military leader. The face bears a striking resemblance to a certain Adolf Hitler. I want to go to Oliver now. Oliver, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Katie.
Yes, Oliver, you're an art dealer yourself. You're horrified by this.
I'm horrified as an art dealer, but I'm also I'm more horrified because I'm the founder of Holocaust Awareness Ireland. My mother is a Holocaust survivor, and I'm also speaking on behalf of the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland. So I'm speaking on this subject for the Jewish community. So there are a number of reasons why I'm horrified.
Talk to me about the items in question. I mean, they're obviously what we would describe as Nazi memorabilia. These items do come up for sale from time to time. Is there any circumstances in which you believe it would be acceptable to trade in these?
Absolutely none. And in many countries, including Germany and France, it's actually illegal. So there's no reason at all to be making money out of objects that are representative of the most evil regime that we've experienced in modern history. And particularly when we think about survivors like my mother, for example, who is still alive, I just think it's completely immoral, it's tasteless. On top of that, if you look at the estimates, they're tiny. This auction house is likely, if it's lucky, to make something like 50 euros in commission. Why would you bother? It's extraordinary. Back to the items themselves. So the death mask is, it's disingenuous that it's catalogued as the death mask of a German military leader. It is absolutely, obviously Adolf Hitler. You have a toothbrush moustache. It's not Charlie Chaplin. You don't need
Presumably, though, just to be clear, there's probably commercial and legal reasons why you can't definitively say who that is. Would that not be the reason that you kind of listed in that way?
Absolutely not. That's nonsense. There's absolutely no reason other than possibly a fear of putting off a clientele by actually printing the name Adolf Hitler in the catalogue. But it's completely illogical because the compass has a swastika on it. So I don't know what the thinking of the auction house is, but it has nothing to do with a legal standing.
The compass, and I know that you reached out to the auction house. We did as well as Matthew's auction house, who are selling these items on Saturday. We spoke to the auctioneer ourselves as well. He doesn't want to come on our programme today. We did invite him. If he's listening out there now, we'd invite him again. We would love to hear what your view on this is and why you chose to sell these items. This comes up from time to time, Oliver. I mean, there are people who will say it's better not to forget that this memorabilia is about remembering for a really horrific time in our fairly recent history.
But, yeah, I'm afraid that's nonsense. It's about making money. There are museums just filled to the brim with Nazi memorabilia. I always tend to lean on the side of caution as far as making sure that an expert in Nazi memorabilia has a good look at these items, just in case there is a possibility that there's something extremely rare and of historical importance. But much of this stuff was mass-produced. And frankly, if you are that concerned that this history should be forgotten, then donate them to a museum.
And Oliver spoke specifically about the items being sold.
If you look at the compass, for instance, the date is actually the 20th of July, 1944. Now, that date is specific to one particular incident, and that is the failed assassination plot by Klaus von Stauffenberg on Hitler. So that's almost certainly why that compass is engraved with that date. But that date that's if you like, a date that would be significant to a Nazi supporter. To my lot, we have a different view. I look at that date, and I think of the end of an 8-week killing spree at Auschwitz, when 437,000 Hungarian Jews were deported from Hungary to Auschwitz and gassed. That's 8,000 people every day for 8 weeks. So put it into this perspective. The Troubles killed something like 3,600 people were murdered over a 30-year period. And think about the trauma intergenerationally that has caused.
It is unthinkable. It is unthinkable. There's no two ways about it.
It is unthinkable. That object, both those objects, connect me to that past. Connect this community to that past. What I'm trying to do is bring awareness of the Holocaust to the society I live in. I'm not trying to shame anybody. I'm just trying to make people think about what they're doing in relation, well, to all sorts of things, but to collecting this stuff and certainly trading it.
And then Wolfgang, who's based now in Ireland, called Katie.
For me, those items don't seem to be connected or linked directly to the Holocaust. The Third Reich, there was a lot to the Third Reich, not only the Holocaust, which of course was a major part, but I think there's a lot of people out there who are just interested in the military aspect of the Third Reich, of that dark chapter in European history. And as Oliver said, we do not know who those collectors are, what reason they're collecting those items for. And I do not believe that this is a fundraising opportunity, because, as Oliver was saying, the auctioneer makes €50 on an item or something like that. I mean, not many funds are collected.
Maybe on these items, they're not that valuable items in the overall scheme of things, Wolfgang, but we know that there is a very lucrative trade in Nazi memorabilia worldwide, in a global scale. So there is no doubt that there is money to be made and there's bucks to be turned on it.
Absolutely. But
and is that okay?
Well, for myself, as far as I'm concerned, people can collect what they want, as long as they don't glorify this chapter of history. You know, I mean, there are a lot of people who have many different reasons to be interested in these items.
But Wolfgang, can I put you, like, how do you not glorify, or how do you separate out the military history of that period from the devastating human history that we are aware of? Like, you surely one comes with the other and can't be separated.
Well, you see, I'm not personally very interested in military history, but I do know a lot of people in Ireland, but also in the United States, who are extremely interested in this part of history, and they seem to be, scrutinizing every move of the different military activities that were going on at the time. You know, these are things we probably just don't understand. And those items, are they really linked to the Holocaust as such?
Well, it's a Nazi compass with the 20th of July 1944 That's, as Oliver pointed out, very significant date for a lot of people who would have survived that Holocaust.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that one, no, to be honest.
So your point, I think, if I've got you right, Wolfgang, is that just because you collect this, it doesn't mean that you condone the stories behind it.
No, it would be interesting to actually talk to the people who buy these items. I mean, are they sitting in a shrine full of Nazi memorabilia, or do they collect different items from different parts of our history?
Okay, maybe I'll let Oliver respond to that. Oliver, if you're still on the line.
Sure. There are people who sit in shrines. There are people who think that they are just collecting innocently. But there is one point that I do need to make where Wolfgang, I think, is slightly mistaken. The sole policy, the number one policy of the Nazi regime, written down in Mein Kampf, Hitler's memoir in 1924, is the elimination of the Jews. That is the driving motivation of that political movement. So any military action or activity that happens in that period is linked, whether we like it or not, to carrying out that policy. So I think it is rather easy to say, to divorce the two, to say, okay, well, the Wehrmacht, the German army isn't the SS. Well, that's convenient. It's not. When you look at it and examine the history, it's very easy to make the link between the two.
Well, that's Oliver there. Then Paul called Katie about his collection of militaria.
It's one of those things that people who, I say, I came into it very similar to Graham. I inherited bits and pieces from my grandfather who fought in the British at Arnhem. He was in the Second World War, and I got some pieces that way. But as Oliver was saying, one thing people are mistaken. It's not illegal to sell it in Germany. But some of the biggest auction houses in the world are in Germany. One, I can name them quite openly, Hermann Historica. They've been running for years. Another big dealer in Germany, Helmut Weitz in Hamburg. I mean, he has a huge team of people working for him, people that speak multilingual languages and everything else, because of the trade in it is so big. It's a multi-million-pound industry.
Okay, let me just clarify that then. So what is the legal status of sales? Oliver?
Germany, you are not allowed, you couldn't say open a shop and have the medals in a window. The swastikas have to be covered up, and a lot of these dealers that go from fairs to fairs in Europe, there would be military fairs that would sell not just Nazi memorabilia but also Allied memorabilia as well, but they generally have to place a sticker, a thumb sticker over the swastika to cover it. But like the other thing also is, as far as I know, this is a strange one. It can be exported out of Germany, but it can't be imported into Germany. And it's the same in France. There's auction houses there. They have military fairs where there'd be thousands of people at these fairs. I mean, there's one in Belgium, Cini. I mean, it's a huge, huge fair. It runs, say, 3 or 4 times a year, and you would have thousands of guys go to that. And it would be everything on sale, from Nazi memorabilia to Allied military. You know, it's still a very, but as Oliver said, it is a big, huge, it's a very big business.
Okay, can I just ask you though, have you ever bought an item of Nazi memorabilia?
Well, it depends what you class as Nazi memorabilia. As Oliver said, there is the 2 sections. You see, like Mein Kampf would be a very nasty piece of militaria, but a piece of equipment, let's say a pilot would have worn flying over the channel or in a plane, I don't class that as being actually Nazi because it doesn't have a swastika on it. But it is still from that era of history. It's still from that dark era of history.
That's Paul on the live line with Katie Hannon. And in the morning, yes, Bill About Your Hayes was really asking you this question.
Now, have you ever found yourself with a mysterious soggy bottom? I think I'll just leave that question hang there for a second while you all wonder what it is I'm talking about. Or a sunken sponge, or what about a cake that's burnt and smoking on top but raw in the middle? All of the above are common mistakes that bakers make. But fear not, because joining me in studio to go through the common mistake bakers can fall victim to and how to avoid or fix them is Anne-Marie Dunn, who teaches bakery at the School of Culinary Arts and Food Technology at the Technological University of Dublin. Cahal Street was much easier, wasn't it, Anne-Marie?
It was a simple term. CBS, everybody knew where it was.
Everybody knew, but you are now the teacher of bakery at the School of Culinary Arts and Food Technology at the Technological University of Dublin. Okay, let us start with meringues, as you have brought in some lovely pavlova there. It is still the subject of lore in the Boucher-Hayes household, how bad Dad is at this and how long he will keep on whipping away when everybody else with any sense would have given up all hope of ever getting the egg whites to rise. What am I doing wrong? What is everybody doing wrong when they have a go at this?
I think the fundamental point, the main mistake people make, the one thing with meringues and anything where you're whipping up eggs at all, is have all your utensils grease-free. That's number one rule. So make sure you scald out your bowl. If you've whipped cream earlier in a bowl, make sure it's scalded out well with hot soapy water, clean and dry, and that's number one step to success.
The chemistry there is that any fat
will break down the protein of egg white.
Really? Okay.
So that is usually the number one fault. The second most common fault is...
You're trying to tell me that we don't wash our utensils properly?
Well, just to make sure it's grease-free, but as well as that, which people don't realise, there's a very small amount of fat in egg yolk. So the next most common mistake is when they're separating the eggs.
Okay.
So I always use 3 bowls when I'm separating eggs.
3?
Yes, I always will have a collection bowl. Because if your recipe requires 4 or 6 egg whites, it's usually the 6th one that will crack, and the little bit of egg yolk will escape into your 5 other egg whites. And
so
what
that
everybody
6th egg
does
is a write-off as far as you're concerned.
So that's right off. So if you do it in separate bowls, you have a collection bowl for your egg whites. So every time you separate one egg white successfully, you put it into your collection bowl and you put your egg yolks aside.
Okay.
And that way, then, if one should crack, you can use your egg for a scrambled egg or something. But what you do not do is try...
stick a teaspoon in to try and take the bit of yolk out.
The little bit of egg yolk out. Because that's where the most common mistake is made. That little bit of egg yolk is enough to break down the protein of the egg white, which will not allow it to trap in the air. And that's the science behind it, that fat will break the protein of the egg white down.
Now, there is another bit of science that you can bring to this, isn't there, with a little bit of lemon juice?
A little bit of lemon juice. So acidifying your egg whites will strengthen the egg whites as well. So that'll allow more air to be trapped in. So with meringue, it's all about getting your volume in. The sugar will stabilise the egg white, and that will give the sweetness, and also that will eventually make your meringue. If you just whip up egg whites to get air into it, it won't stay stabilised. It'll just be a frothy mass that will break back down into sort of its white itself again if you leave it to one side. But if you add the sugar to it, the sugar sort of liquefies and it holds and stabilises the egg white. But during the whipping stage, that's when the egg white traps in all of that lovely air, and it increases in volume hugely, and then that stabilises.
If you are, in my opinion, unnecessarily storing your eggs in the fridge, are you on a bit of a hiding to nothing with eggs that aren't room temperature?
Always when baking, have your ingredients at room temperature, unless it specifies otherwise. The only other thing I will have at time I will chill things is probably butter for making pastry, to try and keep my pastry cool.
Okay.
But when
would you include milk in that's come out of the fridge?
Not really, because usually milk, when you're adding to it, it's such a small amount. You wouldn't keep, because milk obviously will go off. So when it comes to eggs...
Don't go putting milk in your meringues. We're getting a bit confused here.
No. So basically, I always keep my eggs out of the fridge. I never store them in the fridge. I know that's another taboo subject for people. I keep my eggs at room temperature. I probably use them that quickly. They're not hanging around long enough to go off. The other thing is, don't use really fresh eggs. As eggs stale or get a little bit older, they actually become more acidified. So that's why you will find in recipes containing egg white, you might say a pinch of cream of tartar, which is an acid, a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of vinegar, and that will strengthen the egg white. It will allow it to be more stable when you add the sugar in. It'll hold much better and it'll make a much firmer meringue.
That is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So fresh is not always best.
You will often find bakers, particularly professional bakers, will often, to ensure that their utensils and their bowls are grease-free, they'll just cut a half a lemon, wipe out their bowl, which will actually cut the grease from the side of the bowl.
Anne-Marie Dunn talking to Bill about your haze in the morning. Another Ryan Tubridy show, turning trauma into a powerful debut novel. Charlene Hurtubise was talking to Ryan about her life, her mother, and the book, The Polite Act of Drowning.
First of all, the American accent we'll get out of the way in the sense that where, why, who. So when did you come to Ireland and why?
So I arrived in Ireland around 1996, and I had finished my teaching degree, and I just came with my friend, and we just made our way around Ireland visiting, and so just for a holiday. Started off with a holiday. Just for a break.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you did a bit of hitchhiking.
Did a bit of hitchhiking, and so we were poor college students, and I was here first for a few weeks, and then my friend, who actually is in town at the minute, joined me, and we left Shannon Airport and got into the first car that picked us up, and who happened to have a sheath of knives in his console. Knives. Knives. And
beautiful.
So you know how you are, young women, just going.
Two young women in a truck with a selection of knives.
A selection of knives.
Keep going.
And
where to next?
Where to next? So anyway, basically he kind of he looked at me, looking at them, and said, "Oh, it's okay, I'm a butcher." So we're like, "Oh yeah, it's okay, he's a butcher." So it was okay. So it started, and it just got better, because then my husband's sister ended up picking us up, and
randomly, you'd never met your husband at this point.
Never met my husband.
So this woman.
Yeah. So we were out hitchhiking. It was pouring rain. We were. So they were heading out to Westport, and we were just being polite. We looked on the map and we said, we'll go to Castlebar. And they're like, you don't want to go to Castlebar. Sorry, Castlebar.
Yeah, so somebody was very cruel about Castlebar.
So yeah, and then we ended up meeting my husband out there, and so eventually...
this woman collects you and says, you want to go to Westport. She brings you to Westport, and how did she say, oh, you must meet my brother?
Oh, so her brother just ended up on the scene. So they were a bunch of Dubliners kind of in Westport for the weekend. And one of the guys gave us a place to stay out there. We were staying in a caravan in the wilds of Mayo. So my husband was one of the people who arrived at over the course of the week. It was, what's that week in August where everybody climbs Crowpatrick?
Oh yeah, okay, so it was that particular time of the year.
It was that particular time of the year. So all the Dubliners were coming down, and I met my husband, and he was a lovely fella, very quiet, very shy, and so we just kept moving, and then I ended up back with him in Dublin. And he kind of grew on me, so
it seems.
Yeah, so it seems.
Did you go back to the States to wrap things up there, or did you just...
So I was here, I got a work visa, so I was here for 4 to 6 months, and my plan was to work a little bit here, go on to Spain, and I never went to Spain. My friend went home, and I was left on my own, so I came here to, I just came here, hung out with the Dubliners, and Connor, like I said, grew on me.
And you never said goodbye to Ireland?
No. I did go home. Eventually, I think around Christmas time, and then we just made plans. We just kind of knew that we'd have to
kept it together. So thank God for the man with the knives, because he drove you to your destiny.
Yeah, exactly. The butcher.
Who knew?
So back to the book, The Polite Act of Drowning.
So it's a coming-of-age novel set in Michigan amidst the Great Lakes, and it's the protagonist is Joanne. She's a teenage girl, 16 years old, and a drowning happens in the town, and it shocks the town. but the water settled quickly for most. But for the Kennedy family, Joanne's family, it dredges up secrets. So secrets that have come to the surface. So it's about generational trauma, mental illness, and really just Joanne, this teenage girl navigating through small town American life amidst the troubles that she's facing in a very dysfunctional family.
It's intriguing how in that short few sentences you gave there, Charlene, you mentioned about 4 different words that are metaphors used with the lake, about dredging up secrets, coming to the surface, navigation. It is, the water has that effect, doesn't it? I mean,
it does.
People are so attracted, whether it's the lake or the sea. It's alluring, but it's also terrifying.
Yes, exactly.
So tell me why you describe it as a polite act.
Well, that is kind of revealed at the end of the novel.
Which we don't want to give too much away.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Yes.
But there's still... so the parallel is that it's women drowning in their everyday life. So one of the... I was already writing about this girl with... facing, the struggles that she was facing in a dysfunctional family. And then I came across, for another reason, I came across a quote by, an article by Mario Vittoni. He's an ex-Marine in Florida. And he said in this article about drowning, drowning isn't the violent splashing call for help that most people expect. Drowning is almost always a deceptively quiet event. And just something triggered, I thought, that's it. That's mental illness. That's exactly mental illness. That's women drowning in their everyday lives. A deceptively quiet event where, the suffering and the struggling, you might look perfectly happy, but you're not. There's a lot going on under the surface. And I just saw a lot of parallels between that and
you're describing
water.
The swan, aren't you? Gliding so gracefully on the surface, but underneath. Crazy,
paddling,
just to stay alive and
Absolutely.
To stay well and to mind the babies and just keep going. But on the face of it, as you say, it's also beautiful. Let's go back a few steps to your mother. She had a complicated life. There's no doubt about it. And no one likes, I think, to look back in their life at the negative, because you could drag yourself down. But at the same time, you're very honest about her, because like so often in life, it's not the person's fault that it was all difficult.
Yes.
So will you talk to me a little bit about your mum and tell us her name and
her name was also Charlene.
Lovely.
And it was very important to me that her name was E-N-E and mine was E-E-N. It was the only way to differentiate us. And actually so people would call the house and say, is Charlene there? And they'd say, little Charlene or big Charlene? And I'd be mortified getting on the phone.
Yeah, of course.
Say, hi, little Charlene.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Charlene.
So Charlene Senior.
Charlene Senior. It was my mother, and absolutely lovely woman, very together, very beautiful, quite amazing woman for all that she did with so very little. And for the most part, we didn't know. I only heard about tales of her childhood through other cousins or through aunts or sisters, and so she really kind of had the appearance of having it all together. But she grew up in a very, very they were neglected as children.
There was alcohol in the
alcohol.
family.
They were, their parents, when they were alive, they would leave them 5 children on their own to look after each other. They'd have to go to the neighbors for food. And then eventually her father passed away and they were put into foster care. And in foster care she had just a horrendous time. And eventually she met up with her Aunt Mary. She was taken into foster care. She was removed from a farm. They used to send them out to farms, you see. And they, kind of did some work. So there were a ton of children at these farms. And then some other tragic events happened, and then she finally they were separated from their siblings, sadly, and then she was brought up by her Aunt Mary. She used to call her Aunt Mary, who was a really, really important figure in her life, a very religious woman, and, she really kind of set my mom on the path that she set out. And she met my dad. My dad was, very funny sense of humor, but my mom was the driver.
Okay.
She was definitely the driver. And, but yeah, she was a very, her Catholic religion was very, very important to her. That I think got her through everything, her faith. But it was a really chaotic household. We had 9 children, 8 of us girls, and 1 boy. The boy was the baby.
Was he lionized as the great prince, as a matter of interest?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Loveliest fella that you'd ever meet.
Yeah.
Kindest boy. But most definitely was like, imagine a pillow and Larry being carried around on the pillow.
I think every family has a bit of that going on, yeah. Go on.
I would have loved to have been the boy. I always imagine what my life would have been like had I been the boy.
Yeah.
I was number 6, you see, so there was a few more before he arrived.
But you got your mum's name, the others didn't get that.
Well, that was apparently, and that was something all my life I wish I didn't like that.
You didn't want that?
Because I didn't have that identity. I wanted it my own identity.
And Charlene spoke about her mother's personality.
She was, I don't think difficult. She was very removed.
Removed? What does that mean?
Removed. We didn't connect with her. We used to call her the Victorian. She was very rigid. You went to church.
Victorian's a great name. It's a very polite way of saying. It is a polite way. The ice queen. Forgive me for. Yeah. But you know what I mean.
No. Yeah.
The Victorian is. There's no hugging.
Yeah.
In Victorian.
But that's the funny thing. There was. I remember she used to take us kind of. There was lots. There were lots of I love yous, lots of hugs. It's
so
such
why were you calling her the Victorian
thing.
then, if she was doing that?
So her morals. I think my mom had this dream that she would have these children, and we would all line up for mass, and we'd all be beautifully looked after.
The Von
Trapps. We'd go to mass,
yeah.
The Von Trapps, and we'd all behave ourselves, and we'd sit in our pew and say yes and no, and that's not how teenagers work. That's not how children work.
No, you can never. What a fool would try to legislate for teenagers, because they are magnificent, but they also are trying to find their way. So I would never diss them. But yes,
yes, but I think because she had this this idea that she was so appreciative for what she had, and she was so she was so well behaved, and church saved her, and I just think she had this idea that if you had the right mother, if you had the right person looking after you, if you had the clean house, your children will behave.
Charlene Hurtubise from the Ryan Tubridy Show. And on the Today programme, Philip Boucher Hayes was looking at the issues around world population.
Now, the long-feared and predicted world population bomb may not go off after all. The number of humans on Earth reached 8 billion in November of last year, but now a report suggests that the global population may peak at just 9 billion by 2050, a number far lower than previously thought. I'm joined now by Pádraig Carmody, Trinity College Dublin Professor of Geography, to tease out the implications of this. Good morning to you, Pádraig.
Hi, Philip. How are you?
Can you tell us first, please, before this report came along, what conventional thinking suggested was going to happen to population by 2050 and then by the end of the century?
So the UN estimates suggested population would peak around 10 billion towards the middle of the century and then gradually start to decline after that. But what they've done in this report is they have modelled the economic development factors that affect population, and that gives a lower number.
And what are the economic development factors?
So the way that the UN estimated previously was basically they looked at prior kind of population trends and then pushed those forward into the future. But economic development is happening around the world. On aggregate, humanity is getting richer. Some places are getting poorer, of course. But in the aggregate, we're getting richer as a species. And that means a couple of things. As we urbanize, people have less demand for children, and they don't use them to harvest crops in the fields, etc. Children become an expense when you live in a city, more than a source of income, so people have fewer children.
So where originally we were thinking 10 billion by 2060, when you take these economic factors into consideration, where are we going to end up?
So the report actually has 2 scenarios. So there's one which is called too little too late, which is basically our current kind of trajectory. And they say if we do too little too late, then we're still going to end up with regional ecosystem collapses, severe climate disruption, and so on. And then they have a second scenario that they call Giant Leap, and that's more aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And it talks about the need to transition rapidly to clean energy and those kinds of things. And it's important to say that the report says that population is not the main issue. It's actually, in terms of environmental degradation, it's overconsumption, which is the main issue. So if you look, at the top 10% of the world's population in terms of income, we produce about 50% of global carbon emissions. So it's actually inequality, they say, poverty and women's empowerment and other factors which are really key in terms of reducing our environmental impact. Population is part of the issue, but it tends to attract excessive focus because it's something, I think, that can kind of be externalized oftentimes from the rich countries. It's not us, it's people having too many children in Africa or India. It's not our consumption patterns which are really kind of, wreaking havoc.
This report is not a get out of jail card free then, because 6 billion people consuming as much as each other in the developed world is a recipe for all kinds of disaster that might not necessarily have been the case with 10 billion people, and the poorer half consuming considerably less.
Exactly. So and this is part of the reasoning for including those economic development factors in the report, that population growth is more a symptom. It's a symptom of poverty. It's a symptom of inequality. And if we can redress and alleviate and reduce poverty and inequality, then we'll actually be able to reduce population more effectively. So we're into a kind of win-win scenario.
I've seen so many different reports that say the single biggest impact that you could have on diminishing pressure on the world's resources is to educate women and to give women the access to family planning in the countries where they don't have it. Is that still the case now, do you think?
So the report actually gets into that, and it says education obviously is a good thing in its